This is not just a pipeline. It connects two Israeli cities, but what's so interesting about it is that it used to be known as the Israeli-Iranian pipeline in the 1970s, because the two states worked on it together to transport crude oil through Israel to Europe. But that is a thing of the past.
این غده سرطانی از هنگام آغاز مرحله‌ای رشد کرده.
He pledged, quote, "There will be no Israel in 25 years."
The October 2023 terror attack on Israel by Islamist terror group Hamas has put this conflict on a whole new level, because Hamas is backed by Iran. Iran and Israel are among the biggest military powers in the Middle East, but they are very different. The Islamic Iranian regime denies Israel's right to exist, the only majority Jewish state in the world. But the conflict is about much more than Jews and Muslims. It's also about influence in the region and about Israel's number one ally, the US. Let's unravel what's behind it and what the dispute is really about. After Israel declared independence in 1948, Iran was actually among the first Muslim-majority countries that recognized the new state. So what happened then? The Iranian Revolution in 1979 turned everything upside down when the Western-backed Shah regime was toppled. Ruhollah Khomeini, the leader of the Islamic Revolution, believed that it should be exported throughout the Middle East and the world. He saw Israel as part of the so-called West in the middle of the majority Muslim world as a problem. And ever since, the Iranian regime doesn't recognize Israel as a state, and leaders don't even mention its name. This is one of Tehran's oldest squares. In 2017, this clock was unveiled here, counting down to 2040, to the destruction of Israel. Because that is part of the propaganda of the religious regime in Iran. The square is often the scene of protests like these, transporting the anti-Semitic, anti-Israel rhetoric of the Iranian authoritarian government.
Iran has been using this rhetoric of destroying Israel, but I think we need to be a bit careful distinguishing between rhetoric and reality.
That was Merzad Boroujerdi. He has written numerous books on Iranian society and politics, both in English and Farsi, so he really knows what he's talking about. The square we mentioned earlier, guess what? It's called Palestine Square, for a reason. After Hamas' October attack on Israel, people in Iran protested here in support of the Palestinians, some even in support of terrorist group Hamas. But remember, Iran is an authoritarian state, so these protests might not reflect what people actually think, because we've seen in the past that protests have been orchestrated by the regime. It's important to understand that ever since the Iranian Revolution, the Iranian regime presented itself as a vocal supporter of the Palestinians. So why is that? We asked Abed Kanani, an expert on Arab-Israeli relations.
Using this issue in order to get a recognition as a regional power in the Middle East.
And what he's saying is backed up by political scientist Merzad Boroujerdi.
The way to understand Iranian foreign policy is that they claim to be, quote-unquote, the leader of the Muslim world. They try to formulate this sort of rhetorical campaign that can resonate with the average citizen in the streets of the Arab Muslim world, where they say, we are the defender of the weak. We are the defender of the Palestinians.
We can't go much into detail on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. If you want to know more, check out our video about it. So now you know why Iran sees Israel as its enemy. But its influence literally spills over its borders. This is what Iran calls the axis of resistance. You have already heard of the Palestinian militant group Hamas, which attacked Israel on October 7, 2023, and is deemed a terrorist organization by the US and the EU. Hamas is not the only group in the region that gets funding and arms from Iran. These so-called proxy armies include Islamic Jihad in Gaza and the West Bank, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Syrian Armed Forces, Popular Mobilization Force in Iraq, and Houthis in Yemen. Backing Hamas gave Iran the opportunity to position itself as the leading supporter of the Palestinian cause in the Arab world. Just a reminder, most Muslims in the world are Sunni, including most Palestinian Muslims. So are most Muslims in Saudi Arabia, a big player in the region and the Iranian regime's arch enemy. Saudi Arabia and Iran actually compete for influence in the Middle East. Iran has a Shia majority, which is a different branch of Islam. Same goes for most Iranian proxies in the region, such as Hezbollah. So let's travel a bit further to the north, to the Lebanon-Israel border region. This area in southern Lebanon is under the control of Islamist militant group Hezbollah, which is, like Hamas, backed by Iran. And then there are the Houthis, which operate mainly in Yemen. Just take a look at their slogan. It says here in red, "Death to America, death to Israel, curse on the Jews." Basically, the same chants that we hear some 3,000 kilometers away in Tehran. The hatred against Israel often goes hand in hand with hatred against the United States. So there is definitely a common ideology with the Iranian regime and political support for the Houthis. But Iran denies sending the group weapons. Okay, so there are several militias outside of Iran's borders that are backed by the Iranian regime. And some of them have played a role in the aftermath of the October 2023 attack on Israel. In an escalation of the decades-long hostilities between Hezbollah and Israel, Hezbollah fired missiles into Israel the day after the Hamas attacks, and Israel retaliated with airstrikes in Lebanon. And the Yemen-based Houthis have targeted Israeli-linked ships in the Red Sea. This puts Iran in proxy confrontation with Israel. But does that also mean the Iranian regime itself could act against Israel directly at one point? Let's keep that question in mind for later. So we have taken a closer look at the Iranian side, but Israel did not just sit back and wait. Take these two areas in Sudan and in Syria. Both were hit by airstrikes, one in 2009 and 2013. Israel is believed to be behind these strikes, and hundreds more in Syria, targeting weapons to prevent them from reaching Iran's proxy armies Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. And there's another big and potentially deadly topic: nuclear weapons. The Iranian regime has repeatedly said its nuclear program is only to produce energy.
ایران دنبال سلاح کشتار جمعی نبوده و نخواهد بود.
It's just that world powers such as the US, China, UK, and the EU don't believe them. And Israel doesn't believe them either.
Iran lied about never having a nuclear weapons program.
And just so you know, Israel was one of the biggest critics of the Iran nuclear deal. But that's a story for another video. So for Iran, its nuclear program is a way to put itself in a position of power in the Middle East.
The Iranian nuclear program is also part of their geopolitical plans and part of their way to put pressure on the United States and on the West.
And Israel sees the Iranian nuclear program as threatening to its existence. And by the way, Israel is believed to possess nuclear weapons as well, but it doesn't acknowledge this. Back to Iran. Here are the country's key nuclear facilities. Over the years, there have been many sabotage attacks. Take this nuclear facility in Natanz, where experts say an explosion in 2020 set back Iran's nuclear program by up to 2 years. Iran has blamed Israel for them, and Israeli officials have implicitly threatened to attack Iran's nuclear facilities. Israel's intelligence agency Mossad is also believed to have targeted Iranian nationals, including a series of assassinations of high-profile nuclear scientists, such as the father of Iran's nuclear program in 2020. Israel, however, has never officially admitted to it. Remember the oil pipeline we mentioned at the beginning? Well, today there's no Iranian oil flowing through it. Enter Azerbaijan. Yes, another country that plays a role in this conflict. Since the 90s, Israel has had good relations with Azerbaijan, a Muslim-majority country with an authoritarian regime. Azerbaijan has become one of Israel's key suppliers of crude oil and is a close military partner. One detail is important here. Look at Azerbaijan's south. the country shares a more than 700-kilometer-long border with Iran. And this location could potentially help Israel perform a long-range strike on Iran. So now we have a better understanding why there's a conflict between Iran and Israel. Iran is using anti-Israel rhetoric to gain more power in the Middle East. And Israel is pushing back against Iran's proxies and the country's influence. And we already know, both countries are regional powers. But how come a country as small as Israel is such a big military player? Well, that's partly because Israel is not alone in seeing Iran as its enemy. And it has a powerful friend. The US is Israel's #1 ally, militarily and financially. That support is based on strategic interests in the Middle East. And, as you know, a common enemy, Iran. This map shows countries that have recently normalized diplomatic relations with Israel. The Abraham Accords were a US initiative. They were signed in 2020 by Morocco, Sudan, and more importantly, 2 Gulf states, Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, with Israel. So supporting this coalition of Sunni Muslim countries with Israel was one way the US has been trying to contain Iran's influence in the region. Remember, Iran is officially a Shia country. And the authoritarian government didn't really seem to like Israel improving relations with majority Muslim countries in the region.
این ضد حرکت ضد وحدت اسلامی است و ضد اتحاد اسلامی است.
But one big regional player and Sunni majority country was missing, Saudi Arabia. Israel and Saudi Arabia didn't used to have official relations. Since the beginning of 2023, the US tried to broker a deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And they were supposed to be really close to a historic agreement. Something Iran, Saudi Arabia's arch-enemy, would not have liked, to put it mildly. And we all know what happened next. The October 2023 terrorist attack on Israel by Hamas. And how Israel then declared war on Hamas. The deadly Israeli strikes on Gaza sparked outrage in the Arab world. And they have put on hold the relations between Israel and its neighbors. As you know, Iran's proxy armies are attacking Israel. At the same time, the United States has moved warships to the region. But we still owe you an answer to one question we haven't answered yet. Would the Iranian regime actually enter the conflict itself?
Iran will not be involved, because if Iran involved in this war, it will become a regional and even worse than a regional war.
My argument will be, they know that getting involved in a war with Israel, when Iran really doesn't have any air force to speak of, they are no match for sophisticated Israeli planes.
So it seems Iran wants to avoid getting involved directly. But the Iranian-Israeli conflict is very far from solved right now, as are many other conflicts around the world. If you liked our video, tell us which other geopolitical conflict you want us to map out next.